Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge podcast for the final stage of the UAE Tour. First, World Tour level mountain test, I would say, of the year, if we're not counting Jebel Jais, which was a group sprint as it typically is, from Alan.
Willangahel!
Yeah, I wouldn't call that a mountain, I don't think. From Alan, which is a long transfer to start this stage, which is into the middle of the UAE, actually more to the east towards Oman. They kind of go around Alan for a little bit in that area, and then they head west and come back, where there's often crosswind in that area, and that did play a big role today. Then they come back and go south in Jebel Hafisa to the south of the city. The climb itself, 11 kilometers, 6.7%. The real part of the climb is from 1,500 meters in to a crest at about 8.5 k's in, which is actually quite steep, 8% more or less, with some steeper ramps. It's visually deceiving because it's such a wide highway, but it is quite a difficult climb. Then there's a short, flatter section before a 700-meter punch to the finish, where you can make up or, in fact, lose quite a lot of time. To remind you of the GC standings before the stage, Pogacar obviously in the lead. Not that big a margin, 21 seconds ahead of Joshua Tarling, which you wouldn't be too worried about on a climb like this. But then Romeo 127, Fisher Black 28, his teammate Vine 36, Ciccone 37, Bilbao 38, same time Van Eetveld, Tejada 41, only 44. So third, sorry Josh Tarling, but let's say even Romeo to only from third to 10th with 17 seconds. We obviously have bonus seconds in play here too. So very tight. And any news pre-stage, Benji? Any DNSs?
Yes, we had Carlos Rodriguez from Ineos getting out of the race.
Shit.
He crashed already on stage 5, but also crashed yesterday in a sprint somewhere in the middle of the group together with, I think, a Bardiani rider. He's now leaving the race. I don't know the exact situation of his injuries. Let's hope it's not too bad, because I'd like to see Carlito do well for the rest of the season, but he's not starting the Jebel Hafid stage. Outside of that, I don't remember any notable names for today's stage really being out. There's the likes of Decline, if I recall. Well, actually, it was Molicelli, I think, that didn't start today, but I'm not sure if that's related to injuries or not. Either way, today's stage starts, and there's a breakaway forming. We have a breakaway that is the usual breakaway, but a bit larger. Solution Tech's Vinny Vantini, we get a Bardiani rider here or there, but also Johnny Milan goes in the breakaway. And it's probably for intermediate sprint points, because we spoke about the intermediate sprint classification, but that doesn't take away from the fact that the intermediate sprints still give points for the regular points classification as well. And if Milan wants to take that green jersey, he wants to secure that. He wants to make sure he gets as many points as possible to make sure Merlier doesn't take any points. So I think it's a fair situation for Milan to go in that breakaway. And worst case, he's up the road for Ciccone. I don't see any harm with Milan being in that group. But I think we're all trying to get to the point of this race where the action really starts hitting the fan, which is at about 125 kilometers, 127 maybe, where we turn onto a segment that is an exposed wind zone. So a zone where there's crosswinds and where some splits might happen. There's a few points like that in today's race, but that was the first one where some splits could happen. And we see a couple of teams come to the front. And actually, the first team coming to the front is not exactly the team that you'd shout GC team based on this UAE Tour. Soudal Quickstep comes to the front, then this is not for Tim Merlier, right? They've got a bit of a GC rider in the ranks, right?
This is for William Junior Lasserre. Is he... So how does that work, Benji? I mean, I like Lasserre.
Yes.
But what's his first... But in PCS, it's Junior Lasserre.
Correct.
So what's his name?
I don't know. Whenever I see him, I say William or Junior. I don't really... I've never been addressed and said the other name, so until someone tells me it's the wrong name that I'm saying.
I think a Flemish person's gotten confused with how the American junior names work, where it should be William Lasserre Jr. But anyway, we really like him. He's super talented young rider. He's not the most hyped compared to the young Christians, the Morgados, those sort of generation, but out of U23s, he was very solid, and as a neo-pro last year, he was really, really good across the season. His first race at Alula, he came second, so he looks here to stay. And yeah, I really like him.
La Vuelta last year, he was actually very vibrant in the group, if I recall correctly. The Landa they had as GC rider, but he played a significant role for Landa in that race, was in a couple of breakaways. So the guy can definitely climb, and the guy can compete for a World Tour breakaway victory with the level he has. So he's not a pancake, as Patrick would say, now that he's understood the Dutch expressions of the world. But he's also not the top GC rider either. So I think that's actually incentivizing Quickstep to make moves like this. If he was a top 3 GC rider, this work wouldn't necessarily be necessary, because then he can just beat the other GC riders on the climb. But since he's a rider that is kind of struggling to get into the top 10 of the UAE Tour, this is their method of trying to get rid of half of the GC riders that he's competing with for that top 10. And some riders like that, or Leonard van Eetveld, for example, is the kind of rider that is a better climber, but might be worse in echelons. And as a consequence,
missed every split.
Yeah, he missed every echelon, and today he misses it again. And it's not just Soudal Quickstep pacing, by the way. Red Bull bought a Hansgrohe as well with Fisher Black. I would classify Fisher Black as a solid climber in this race, but when it comes to Jebel Hafid, I expect him to be worse than on Jebel Jais. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Fisher Black's like, he can't expect to be better than Chicone, Onley, Van Eetveld. They're all like 62, 63 kgs. They are better climbers than him. So it's the longer climbs where he struggles a little bit more.
Gravity.
And yeah, Bora did a fantastic job. Like they I think initiated it actually with quick steps. So Pogačar makes it. He was, out of all the crosswind splits, this was the one he was most out of position and surprised by.
Yeah.
This week. But he makes it back easily with teammates with Vermeersch and Heracrots. UAE, we were questioning maybe, or saying, oh, they've brought a very rouleur-heavy GC team to the UAE Tour. And that paid dividends. Pogačar made every single split this week. Now, most of them he made himself. Today, he did have come back on the wheel. And they sort of backed that Vine and he could handle themselves on the climbs, and also with the other UAE guys, they can do half the climb too. They're rouleurs, and Jais, they did 2/3 of it with Novak. So, the key for Pogačar losing GC here was never would he be isolated too much on the climbs. It was there's something really bad happened to him in crosswinds. He makes it. But the question then was, he said in the interview afterwards, and I agree, I was like, he didn't expect the group to cooperate. And this happened last year. There was a split before her feet last year, and it came back. And actually, the group ahead who invested the energy seemed to pay for it more than the GC guys who came back in the wheels later, because you got to roll through in the front echelon. But UAE Road, they didn't have to. But I guess it's always better to just be in the front echelon riding, then you can't miss it.
It's also, how much does it become riding versus rolling through the echelon? Because at the end of the day, if you look at the way an echelon works, if you're still in the exposed wind zone, if you're still in the crosswind section, then it's logical that you ride around. But it wasn't just those segments. We also saw them ride around a little bit and a relay in the segments that are not crosswinds anymore for the rest of the race. So they were indeed adding to the pace. But I would also add, outside of UAE, I do see incentive with certain teams to keep riding. For example, Soudal Quickstep, I'm sorry, but there's a couple of riders that Lecer is fighting against for that top 10. I'm going to name some. Van Eetveld, Storer, Riccitello, Steinhauser, Keplinger. Those are all riders that Lecer is fighting for that top 10 for. So for me, it's very logical that Soudal Quickstep keeps pacing. Red Bull Bora Hansgrohe, it's whether you see Leonard van Eetveld as an enemy of Fisher Black, which I do, then I understand that they would consider keeping up the riding in that group. Outside of that, there might be individual reasons why certain teams ride, but I don't remember which other riders had specific teammates in that group, etc. UAE, I agree with that they didn't necessarily need to ride.
In the end, they decide to, and I think they were probably in two minds. And anyway, that group, I still thought there was a chance it was going to come back together. It doesn't. So we got an interesting podium battle now, because Van Eeveld's out of it. Bilbao, Chicone, Romeo. Bilbao and Chicone are within 1 second of each other. Romeo's 10 and 11 seconds ahead of them. Only is a bit further back. He's 17 seconds behind Romeo. Pogacar's got 2 domestiques, neither of which are great climbers. So how will the climb go? Movistar with 2 riders. With Castrillo, he's an engine. What can he do for Romeo, who probably isn't the most explosive climber, or isn't the most explosive climber either? So I was really interested to see what would happen on her feet, actually. And it kind of went as I expected. UAE, basically, Pog's strategy is don't try and get these 2 rouleurs to the last K with me, because that's not realistic. You get attacked. His strategy is basically pace as hard as you can Vermeersch and Heracles, and when you finish, I'll attack, and then I won't be isolated. Because, well, I will be isolated, but I'll be isolated at the front of the race, which is always the best place to be isolated. So that's what he did, basically.
Exactly, and like if you look at the specific situation, then like when you run out of your domestiques, attack is often the best defense, because otherwise you open yourself up to get countered. If Pogacar does not attack after Heracles and Vermeersch do their pacing, then he's going to get countered left and right by other riders, and it might make it a little bit more difficult. But even in that situation, I'm pretty sure Pogacar still wins. But regardless of that detail, I think attacking is the best defense after that happens. So like you say, climb starts, the gap is 3 minutes to that group with Van Eetveld. And it's first Vermeersch, then Heracles. That was maybe a little bit of a surprise for me, because on Jebel Jais we saw it the other way around, where Heracles took up the flat work, and then Vermeersch ended up doing the climbing segment. But here we see it the opposite way. Is that because Heracles is a lighter rider?
I think so, yeah. Well, yeah, he definitely is lighter. He's had some okay climbing performances. They both do a pretty good job. And yeah, Pogacar goes. I don't know why Oscar Onley, like a few riders, keep doing this. Why you sit in front of Tadej Pogacar when his teammate's pacing? Like if you have an idea to follow, Onley's idea was he was going to try and follow. Movistar different. Movistar were like, they were doing their own race, which was smart. Romeo and Castrillo were going to follow the pace of Heracles, which is the right pace for them. And then when all the bullshit happens in front of them, not our race, Castrillo is going to pace Romeo. And if that's your plan, then you can sit wherever, doesn't matter. But if your plan is to follow Pog, why you sit second wheel? Also with Ciccone behind you.
Yeah, that's very true. And I would classify the riders in that group, the leftover group, with Pogacar at the foot of Jebel Hafid, into certain categories. We've got Ciccone. Before the race, I would say Ciccone is probably going to try and react to Pogacar, and he's probably the one rider in the group that I'd be okay with doing it. Because that's such a Ciccone thing to do, and I'm not sure he will capitulate afterwards. He won't be able to follow Pogacar, though. Then we'll look at the others in the group. Fisher Black, 100%, should ride his own tempo before the race starts. I would 100% say that, because we are not certain of his abilities on a climb like this versus his top riders, because, well, he's used to shorter climbs, right?
Yeah, I think much shorter climbs. I mean, Onley's the surprising one to me, because Croatia race last year, we were all watching break formation. You're all watching when the break was being controlled for Lund Andersen in Croatia in October last year, September.
Yes.
Oscar Onley was the man pulling. He's like, long power is really good. So I really thought Onley was going to be second best. So
but by overextending, because he did overextend in the end.
For sure.
When Pogacar attacked, the response was Ciccone and Onley try to respond directly to Pogacar, and Fisher Black is kind of lagging a little bit behind on the response to Ciccone and Onley. So that's the response there. Fisher Black is doing the wrong thing, in my opinion. Should have done his own tempo. Onley, in my opinion, too. Ciccone, is it weird that I give him the benefit of the doubt, that I'm okay with him making this move, him responding to Pogacar, even though...
Yeah, I mean, he followed Rogan Remco in Catalunya on Unipuerto, steeper than this. But yeah, he just can't follow, and then that puts him on a gap. I mean, you got to try. And also, if Pogacar creates the gap for you and you don't completely blow up, at least you've been dragged away from from Romeo. If you're trying to get on the podium, you got to get ahead of Romeo. You got to get away from Bilbao. Bilbao does the other strategy, just following the Movistar train, which is smart as long as they're still pacing at a good pace. So we see a lot of different strategies. Fisher Black Fisher Black definitely overextends. He should have sat with the Movistar guys. And and he really blows up because of it. And yeah, Pog basically, it's a different style attack to say his Galibier attack. Like his Galibier attack last year is way more explosive to shake Vingegaard off the wheel. This was a longer 30-second attack out of the saddle to basically make the other guys overextend, and then they just couldn't follow anymore. They went off the wheel immediately. So, and then he settled into a rhythm, and that was the race pretty much.
I will say that, like, before this race started, I gave a 0% chance for anyone to beat Pogacar here. I just didn't believe in it at all. So I'm not surprised by that. I'm not disappointed by that. The fact that it was finished so early, the race for the victory on today's race, because I expected it to happen. But then we bring over to the podium battle and actually found it quite intriguing because of the fact that some riders decided to overextend at the start, therefore capitulate. Fisher Black ended up dropping off the back of Only and Ciccone pretty early. Only ends up dropping off the back of Ciccone. And we've got this nice battle where then behind those riders, we've got the two Movistar riders, Castrillo working for Romeo, doing the tempo there with in the wheel of them, Bilbao. There was a fourth rider there that I forgot what his name is. So who was that? The fourth rider that was there and dropped early with the Movistar boys.
De Bruyne?
Ramses De Bruyne? I don't know. I have no clue. Maybe there was no one. I'm just inventing a person on a bike.
Conrad, De Bruyne, Castrillo. If it was anyone, I think it was Ramses or Leclerc.
Ramses has been climbing pretty good, huh?
Yeah.
Guy's got the name of a pharaoh.
Yeah. Anyway.
What else can we say? Because, well...
Yeah. Ciccone counters only.
Catching who?
Ciccone counters only. He goes. The gap stays 40 seconds. Pog's chilling. Castrillo eventually pulls off. And as he's doing so, just as Only's come back to that group and cracking Bilbao, he's the assassin. I knew he was going to do it. There's a crest here. And over the crest, if you've got some energy and you accelerate, and then you can work with another rider, you can really put other riders, you can rip the gap open. It's what Van Aertveld did last year. It's what Bilbao did last year. Bilbao does that. Ciccone goes with him. It was just as Only was dropping. He can't get back. Romeo is shaken off by Bilbao. Bilbao gets to Ciccone. Sorry, Pog wins, of course. Bilbao gets to Ciccone. Those two relay for a time because they have to put time, at least 10 seconds, into Romeo plus minus bonies. And then they get to the punch. That's when the cooperation ends, and Ciccone wins the sprint and comes second, 33 seconds behind Pogacar. Bilbao on a little gap, 35 seconds. Their cooperation was worthwhile because they put 16 and 14 seconds into Romeo, respectively, to both move onto the podium on GC. Pogacar wins GC 114 to Ciccone, Bilbao 119, Romeo 126. Only moves up 5 spots to 210. Actually, in hindsight, he couldn't have moved onto the podium given the strength of Ciccone and Bilbao today. Fisher Black moves down a couple of spots. He finishes on 2:05. Could he have finished with Castrillo if he paced himself 50 seconds quicker? Probably, actually. And then he would have been in play with Only, maybe, but still good result from him. Top 10. Castrillo, 7th. Leclerc moves into from 18th to 8th. Is that his first World Tour GC top 10? I'm going to hazard a guess that it is. 3 seconds ahead of Tejada and only 11 seconds ahead of Conrad. So it's actually a close run thing between Leclerc, Conrad, and De Bruyne. So Leclerc really, his good performance at the end of the climb, pacing himself well, got him that top 10. Van Aertveld and that other crew, they were on 3:55. I don't know their climbing time. Van Aertveld, Steinhauser, Stora, Rubio, but if you missed the crosswind splits, it was all over for you today. So the big losers of the day were Van Aertveld.
Yep.
And I was going to say Jay Vine, but not really. Like he was, they won the race.
Yeah.
He would have been
out of the top 10 when
anyway.
it comes to Van Aertveld as well. So completely gonzo. And like, it's probably disappointing for the likes of Steinhauser as well to not have the opportunity. But at the end of the day, UAE Tour, such an important factor of it is Echelon. So you got to be ready when it happens. And if you are ready and then you don't have the physical capabilities to get in the Echelon, then at the end of the day, shit happens. That's the UAE Tour. And we've seen this happen a couple of times before at this race where it's highly impacted by what happens before the climbs and not just what happens on the climbs. Was it not the addition that Remco Evenepoel won and Plappy podiumed, or was it last year that Plappy podiumed, where Echelons really put Plapp in a good position to podium the race?
23. Was that the one? That was the stage one. Yates missed it.
Yeah.
Plappy sprinted across on the Almirtha stage.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the addition that like already shows. Even the women's race last year, if I recall correctly, had a clear amount of losers in Echelon stage that define what is possible on the climbing stage, and now it happens in the same stage, and we've had that before on Jebel Hafid. And at the end of the day, actually, honestly, I think it benefited the activities on the climb, because you would say, okay, if the Echelons don't happen, UAE arrives at the final climb with more domestiques, so Pogacar attacks later on the climb, and I think that would also worsen the battle for the podium, because while we would see the likes of Van Eetveld and Seville fighting against each other, we wouldn't necessarily have the dynamic of someone overextending and capitulating fully. Now there was a longer time spent on the climb for that to happen, you know?
Yeah, this was actually a decent Hafid. Like, if you okay, Pog's going to do what he's going to do. He's not really much to say about it. He does what they brought him here for. I think I'll repeat again, his biggest fear coming to this race was losing fitness in advance of a 200-kilometer classic that he has to do in 2 weeks strata. That to me, that was his biggest fear coming into this race, or maybe being in decent enough shape to win it and then losing time in crosswinds. That's why they brought the Rouleur squad. But yeah, I think it opened up the race a lot. And Castrillo, I mean, Movistar got to be happy. I know Romeo loses the podium, but, you know, they still get 290 points from GC, do they?
Yep.
No, yeah, more or less. 270. I
Close
think,
enough.
yeah, I think they got to be happy. Who else could be happy? Quick Step, top 10 on GC, 2 stage wins. That's what you want.
Quick thing. You are right. It's 290 because Rubio gets 20 points as well for getting 16th.
Yeah. So
good points haul, that is for sure. And actually a bad points haul for Lotto as a consequence of Van Eetveld dropping out of that top 10. That's a big influence on their points haul of this race.
Astana, I think, would hope for a bit more from Tejada. I actually think he looked. I thought he'd climb a bit better, frankly. He really wasn't.
Because he was in the first echelon, right?
Yes, and he got dropped by like Ramses de Bruin. Like, Tejada climbed badly. He should have finished more around 7th on GC, not 10th or wherever he finished. Who else? Visma had a bit of a shocker. Koy out with sickness, so their prime sprinter for the Sprinters Royale couldn't even get there. Then Behrens out this morning in break formation with a pretty bad crash. And then Lemon missed every split and got dropped on Jais. So they won't be too happy. Ineos won't be happy. I think their guys were in good shape. I think Langolotti and Carlito were good, but they both broke their collarbone. And Langolotti's couldn't avoid it. Carlos, I don't know why GC riders in sprints, but we've been saying this for years, so it's not just race to this crash. In a sprint, you cannot be put on a gap. They changed the rules over the off-season. It's basically in a flat sprint stage, you cannot be put in a gap. Remember in the Vuelta a few years ago where they actually did do it and Froome was pissed? They changed the rules so even that cannot happen if there's a weird commissaire that day. There is no reason, absolutely none, in a flat sprint, if you're a GC rider in the last 500 meters, to be anywhere near another rider. You can literally leave 70 meters and not be put on a gap if they're going 60 kph.
That's true, because it's the amount of seconds from the last rider in the group, right? To the first rider of the other group.
Yes.
So that is just so unlikely to happen that you can't afford to do that. And if someone crashes in front of you, that ends up blocking you, that's a very small chance for that to happen. And also, question, let's say you're in the last 3 kilometers and a crash happens in front of you, you get blocked by that crash, you get into the 3 kilometer rule anyway, no?
Yeah.
So even that would not end up with losing you time. So I fully agree with you. If it's stage 1, I understand it. Because there's GC riders fighting for potential top 5 in the stage. What, sorry?
On stage 1, there can actually be gaps. It's an uphill sprint.
A flat sprint stage, completely different. That's unnecessary to do that. So agree with you there. And that's the wrap up for the UAE Tour.
And we saw Poggy last year. I keep saying, probably want to set how you race races by what the best rider in the world does. On the flat, when the domestiques are pulling, don't sit single file in P5 at 50 kilometers an hour for 3 hours. Go where Pogačar sits, behind the biggest rider he can find in a bubble.
Milan.
Milan, Novak, whoever. On climbs, don't sit P2 in front of people that are going to attack you. On sprint stages in the Tour last year, Pogačar, after the 3 kilometers to go, literally sat at the back with Wellens and Pollitt, leaving 30 meters radius all around them. So, and if there's a crash in front of you, just ride up to the crash and brake and then put your foot down, and you're going to get the same time.
Exactly.
Okay, that was UAE Tour. What did we learn from this, Benji?
What did we learn from this? First of all, nothing when it comes to Pogačar. He's in the form you'd expect him to be at this point in the season. I'd expect him to win the UAE Tour easily. I would expect him to drop everyone easily on Jebel Hafid if there's no real top competition here. When it comes to the time trial, also the level I expected when it comes to Pogačar. When it comes to the sprints, very happy to see Milan and Merlier being
that was great. That was
very close. Yeah, exactly. The sprints are always the highlight when it comes to UAE Tour for me.
The sprints delivered this year.
They're just so close together, Milan and Merlier. Yes, Milan wins stage 1 when Merlier doesn't even try on that stage because it's an uphill sprint. But at the end of the day, on the flat sprints, it's so incredibly close that, like, I'm pretty sure they're both going to the Tour de France. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Philipsen would also go to the Tour de France. He looked a bit weaker towards the end of the week. Definitely on stage 1, I had hope. But that kind of fell true after stage 6, to be honest, because there he was completely outclassed. I don't know. I'm looking forward to the rest of it. What, are there other races this year, like a Tirreno or something, where they show up both of them? Because Melier's doing the classic, so we're talking...
I reckon we'll have another Sprint Royale in Tirreno. Milano will do it.
Melier doesn't, apparently.
Really? Philipsen
at least
not
on the list right now. Kuurne de Pani he's listed for Gent-Wevelgem, RVV, etc. But that could be temporarily not filled in yet. The likes of Philipsen, we're talking... also not on the list yet. So we might just not know, by the way.
Yeah.
So because those are not the races that Belgian journalists ask for when they're like, Melier, what races are you going to? They want to hear the classics, not Tirreno. But hot take. I'm scared.
Mark Cavendish owes his 2022, 23, and 24 salary to Christoph Rudolph. Because if Alpecin hadn't lost their minds and made their best sprinter lead out Philipsen every sprint in the 2021 Tour de France, Cav never would have come so close to the record and then been close enough to continue. Because Merlier was never losing all those sprints Philipsen lost to Cavendish. Merlier won the first sprint stage of that tour so easily, and then for whatever reason, internal politics, they made Merlier lead out Philipsen, who was way slower, and then Cav won every sprint.
I like your hot take. I'd have to go back and watch every single one of those sprints to know if I fully support your take. But I like it. I won't deny. I think there's something in there.
It's just a sliding doors moment. It's the decisions, because Merlier was this good then. Also, he's not. It's not like he's now 23 and he was 19 then. No way.
I would say he's gotten a lot better at positioning himself.
Yeah, that's true.
Having the confidence to launch at certain times in a sprint too early or stuff like that. And I think that does help a lot. But in terms of sprint speed, I don't think it's that big of a difference, like you said.
Of course, the quick step lead out then was so good. It was Seneschal, Asgren, Ballerini, Merku, then Cav, all locked in. It was.
Now they're all washed.
I mean, Merku's retired. Cav's retired.
Well, hey, is he still doing winning lead outs? No. So.
Okay. What else did we learn? Yeah, nothing really. There's no Romeo, maybe the best young, no other.
Yeah.
Ciccone only didn't take that step And Van Aert didn't get the opportunity to take that step where you're like, they're onto the new echelon of guy.
But I agree with Romeo and Castrillo confirming.
Yes,
especially
Movistar
Romeo
will be happy.
Castrillo confirming that he can still climb
Valuable
after Velva
rider.
last year, and he's a good rider in general. Fully agree. So I see something there as something I did learn, and also I would also say that Vermeer's form at UAE also is something I learned towards the classic necessarily. Because before this, you could always doubt, okay, is he going to get back to the level he was at Lotto, or is he going to surpass that? Stuff like that. When it comes to Hergots, what role would he play for the team? It's kind of those kind of things, those small little things that I feel like I did learn in this UAE Tour, if that makes sense.
Elsewhere around the traps, I mentioned him yesterday. Aldo Talieu on Lotto Devo won the prologue in Rwanda. So congrats to Aldo, young rider. In Algarve yesterday, Milan Fretin won the uphill sprint. Visma paced the last few hills, but couldn't really make a difference. And then basically all the sprinters were still there, and Van Aert also wasn't so good following the wheels through the last few roundabouts. Fretin won ahead of Meus, Ganna, Deli, Biniam, Mikkels, Van Aert, Burati, Van Uden, Sturven. I will say, for me, Fretin absolutely clear should be relegated.
Yes.
Now, Van Aert, let's be clear, Van Aert was not winning. It didn't stop Van Aert doing shit. He wasn't winning.
Irrelevant.
I'm not saying it for that purpose. It's more, he has a lane to his left, there's space, and he just chops Van Aert, who nearly crashes. And I don't see how this is not as bad as what Philipsen got relegated for or others in. Yeah, it's because he won. That's why he didn't get relegated.
I agree. So to be clear for the people that did not watch the race, basically Milan Fretin, from the helicopter angle, the finish is at the top of the screen. We look from the helicopter angle. Fretin starts on the left side of the road, tries to come past Wout van Aert on the left side of Wout van Aert, but starts going to the right too early while Wout van Aert is still there. And Wout has to do that kind of maneuver where you're like, oh, I need to move my bike right and kind of stop pedaling. And basically, otherwise I would crash behavior because of the move from Fretin into him. So to me, that's a deviation because Fretin moves from left slightly to the right.
Deviated.
It's enough of a deviation because otherwise he wouldn't be endangering Wout van Aert in the first place, who didn't move. And there's endangerment, in my opinion, because if Wout van Aert doesn't react to it, he crashes. So deviation plus endangerment equals the application of the deviation rule, which would, according to rules, say relegation or yellow card. I would say relegation based on previous decision 100%. So he should 100% be relegated there. But there's a couple of decisions in the last 36 hours that I also don't agree with. Like, even in today's UAE Tour, forgot to mention in the recap, there was an intermediate sprint in the breakaway, in like the front echelon, where Robbe Gijs from Alpecin was in that group, and also Duric, the guy we've been talking about so many times, the Solution Tech's Vinny Fantini guy. Sprint starts, Milan sprints like crazy at the front. He wins the points. But behind that, we see a battle between Robbe Gijs, who starts on the right side of the road, and he's like, oh, am I really going to sprint for it? I don't know. And then he decides to start sprinting for it when Duric is already next to him, basically taking Duric entirely to the barriers, to the point that Duric has to stop pedaling at a certain point. That's a deviation plus endangerment, in my opinion. But then Duric reacts by kind of doing like the rebound of like, you think you're going to do that to me? I'll do it to you. And kind of does it backwards. And you know what the UCI decided? They decided to relegate Duric and not Robbe Gijs. Which, to me, that should be both relegated.
Why is Gijs sprinting for it?
I don't think anyone knows.
There's no money available and he's not in the intermediate sprint classification.
Like, I'm okay with him having the right to do it if he wants to do it.
Yeah, you're allowed to sprint, but if you're going to sprint for nothing, at least sprint in a straight line then.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's not a Tour de France bonus sprint. Like, then, okay, you move a little bit, I can understand it. Like Scaroni, very professional maneuver on Buitrago through a chicane finish yesterday.
Yes.
That's for the win. And Buitrago wasn't happy about it. But yeah, if you're sprinting for nothing, come on, sprint straight. I didn't see it though. So I'll take your word for it. But yeah, it's so whereas when guys are shoulder to shoulder and Van Aert was coming in on Dainese to box him, and they're shoulder to shoulder, and Dainese leans on him and creates space for his front wheel. To me, that's sprinting, and that's okay. I don't mean a headbutt. I don't mean a shoulder barge. I mean he creates space for himself, and he did it in a controlled way. What Dainese did yesterday, I have zero problem with.
I would agree with yesterday's sprint where I'm like, okay, I'm gonna see this through my fingers what I saw there from Dainese. But if I count all the sprints that I've seen of Dainese this year combined, I do think he's not a clean sprinter. But I can't penalize the guy from not being a clean sprinter on something where he didn't necessarily do anything dirty enough to get penalized. So I agree with you.
Yeah. We didn't recap Andalusia yesterday, Benji?
We did not, because we dipped out after UAE Tour.
I already mentioned Scaroni. Very, very strong. Oh, sorry, I'll do the bigger race first. Yassine Hamza wins again in the 1.2 ahead of Gidic in the Grand Prix de la Ville d'Alger. But in Alps Maritime, very, very strange. So EF ride for Carapaz. They set a hard pace. Cepeda goes to launch him. Carapaz don't have it. We saw it a fair bit last year, actually, at this time of the year. He gets countered by Buitrago. Lenny gets onto the wheel then of Scaroni, who's chasing strongly. Scaroni gets across. Lenny then counters him. Scaroni closes him. Scaroni then says to them, I'll pull if you guys pull, because this is like the main GC stage. In case you haven't noticed, Astana want fucking points. And so he wants to secure top 3 on GC. Bahrain then stop rolling attacks on him, even though they get to a gap of 30 seconds. They then put Lenny alone on the front to pace all out to open the gap. Bear in mind, Scaroni just obliterated everybody in the uphill sprint in the one-day race yesterday. Scaroni then recovers in the wheels the whole time with Buitrago in the wheels. They don't attack him again. And they get to the uphill finish and Scaroni just masterfully dusts Buitrago. And I was like, you had a huge gap. There's bonies. Surely at a certain point you stop pacing with Lenny and play with him a bit again. It's like they expected him to gift it to Santi because they put Lenny to pace.
No, to me it seemed a lot like they were like, okay, this is the only GC stage, or like the main GC stage of this race, because the second stage is a bit lighter, I would say. That fits Scaroni even more than this first stage. So it seemed like they were like, okay, let's try and secure our GC first, but they forgot about the second part, like you mentioned, where they should be rolling attacks once the gap is over 25-30 seconds. I reckon you start rolling attacks on Scaroni, and they did that maybe once with Lenny Martinez before they started doing the pacing, and then you still have 4 kilometers where there's action to me. If you start pacing 2 kilometers, I'm okay with it, and then with 2.5 kilometers to go, you switch to rolling attacks, perfectly fine. But it felt a bit like they kind of were like, okay, we give up on trying to beat Scaroni, let's just ride to the line and we'll see if Buitrago can do it head to head.
And they won by 47 seconds, which is a 2-stage GC race. Today's a chill stage. Today they won't be big gap. They had margin to play with. So,
but
Scaroni, wow.
About Scaroni, I want to talk to you for a second. Started off the season in Castellon 5th, Valenciana 2nd, Calvia 2nd, then Tramontana 17th, but that is because he punctured out of the front group. So the only reason he got out of a top 5 this season so far is because he punctured out of a top 5 out of a front group. And then after that, his next race says NR, Trofeo Andrade. I think that's because the race didn't end up happening.
The wet one they stopped.
Classic VAR, he ends up winning. Murcia, he gets 3rd. Alpes Maritime du Var, he gets first stage victory.
And he's going to win GC.
Out of 7 road races, he has not gotten out of the top 5 except once where he had a puncture. So he probably would have top 5'd.
And he's going to have 570 UCI points in 9 race days.
Yeah.
In 9 race days. Bear in mind, okay, they sound like some Mickey Mouse races he's doing. He's against the UAE hit squad every single race there. Morgado, Velens, Del Toro, and he's against Hirschi, Stork, who are flying. Like
he's losing to them in some of them, but that doesn't matter if you get second and third every single time.
He's also in a lot of them racing to win. He wasn't racing like negative.
True.
Crazy shape. And like yesterday, crazy shape. Like he chased. He didn't sit with the other guys and then sprint because he could have. He could have. If when Santi went, he could have sat with Group Carapaz and Fortunato and then sprinted to come second and then come second on GC. But he didn't. He actually chased with Lenny in the wheel the whole way. So I have been joking about Astana stat padding top 10s, but he's racing to win here and he's going to win GC probably. So and it just goes to show a lot of things like the knock-on effects. I've also spoken about sliding doors, COVID, and the war in Ukraine. So he was on Gazprom in 2022.
Yep.
And basically was progressing really quite well when you look at his 2021 results. Yeah, he's on Gazprom in 21 and he's, how old would he have been? 24. Yeah, he's top 10 in Veneto Classic, 13th in Emilia. He's top 10 in some Sicilia stages. He's like a solid, good rider, progressing fine. The war happens in Ukraine, where also then he has to sort of race in like national team races. So he has to race in Adriatica Ionica, wins a stage, but he's for the Italian team. Eventually gets an Astana deal in 2022. And then Astana was an absolute mess in 2022 and 23. Look at the talent they had and how it's performing now. Scaroni,
it's true, and
Javier Romo. Look at him now.
Yep. And like, he was still not performing absolute dog shit in those years either. Like, we see still like top 10s in a few Italian classics. We had top 10s in like a Poloni stage. He ended up winning 2 stages of Adriatica Ionica, stuff like that in 2022. So he's still performing on that team, which then it depends on whether you can either find a team afterwards where that sees the value in those results and knows the team was the reason for your downsides in performances, or you stay with the team until it gets better. And he kind of stayed with the team until it gets better. Because in 2025, let's be honest, like even last year, like we knew Scaroni was a good rider, especially after Cadell's, Figuera, etc. But it's not like he had out there performances like 2025. 2025 is a serious step up, you know?
Yeah, I mean, he was still good last year, but you're right. This is different. Chasing Butrago with Lenny in the wheel and then destroying both of them on a mountain, soft mountain, but a mountain, that's different. And so really, really impressive. In Andalusia, there was breakaway with my friend Seb Berwick in it. He was looking strong, but he lost his teammate, Joel Nicolau. He needed numbers. And in the last bit, Diego Uriarte, who was definitely not the strongest in the group, but he was the smartest, attacked the Equipo Confirma rider. Connor Swift and Scottson looked at each other, rode each other out of it, and he wins the stage. So pretty cool to see finally a breakaway win. We don't see too many breakaways these days. Elsewhere we'll have a weekly show tomorrow, so we can wrap up Algarve there. The Algarve TT starts later this afternoon, and at the moment in Andalusia, there's a pretty dangerous breakaway for UAE to control. So I'll be tuning in to watch that now.
Exactly. 2 more things about the races you mentioned. I think Jarno Wieder had a bit of a parquet on the Classic VAR, which is like the one-day race that happened 2 days ago. But then on the stage 1 of Maritim, he actually looked a lot better. So I think that's the level that Lotto should be happy about when it comes to Widar. So let's see whether that evolves throughout the season, whether he can get some results with that level, stuff like that. And when it comes to the winner of Andalusia, like you said, Diego Uriarte, I think he's actually a little bit better than people might be. Because like people might look at it now and think it's okay, it's a breakaway one-off. But I actually think this guy is a relatively okay climber. And I recall seeing him in the group at Alula Tour when there was like 12 GC riders left or something on one of the climbs. And he was present there. I was like, oh, this guy's pretty talented. Then he ended up beating me on Pro Cycling Manager the other day, as in the character. So I was like, this guy must be pretty talented. So I don't know. I feel like there's something there. It might not be the level of Castrillo by the end of the year, but I feel like there's going to be some growth there in the next 1.5 years. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, can Farmer keep winning? They're going to keep developing riders. He might be one of them. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. We'll see the weekly show tomorrow. Can Vingegaard take back the lead on Almeida? We'll be watching that on our Sunday afternoon. That's going to be a great Sunday afternoon viewing experience. And until then, ciao.